Welcome back to the deep dive. We're plunging into another really fascinating story today.
Yeah, this one's quite unique. We've got an autobiography, a very personal account.
Right, and it chronicles this journey that's just packed with intuition, innovation, but also some really direct confrontations with, well, what the author sees as major flaws in our global systems.
Exactly. This isn't just someone telling their life story.
Yeah.
It feels more like a blueprint almost for health, for technology, maybe even for how we understand destiny and universal laws.
So, our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack all of that. We need to look at the claims being made, explore the creation of this AI tool, Dr. Maya GPT, get into the philosophy behind it.
And those pretty stark predictions about global leadership and, well, the future of humanity, really. It's got a lot in it.
It definitely does. You can expect this blend of, medical thinking, but also ancient wisdom and this really potent critique of modern systems.
We're setting the stage here for a talk about personal conviction, these ideas of universal laws, and of course the very complicated role technology plays now.
Yeah, it's an invitation, really, for you listening to think about what this means for your own understanding of things, existence, personal agency, our responsibilities. Okay, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So the whole story, the whole philosophy really seems to kick off with this incredibly personal, formative childhood experience.
Right. Picture this. A
Ew.
12-year-old kid, really sick, weak, feverish, just miserable.
And the doctors, they run tests, x-rays, the whole 9 yards, and they come back confident. It's
Yeah.
typhoid. They prescribe this awful tasting medicine.
Which, instead of helping, just seems to make things worse. The kid's getting sicker, more scared, day after day.
But here's the twist. The child actually remembered having something similar when they were, 6 years old.
Yeah, and they knew intuitively that this felt like malaria again. They remember getting quinine back then and recovering really quickly, almost like magic.
So they ask their mom for quinine, right? Despite what the doctor said.
But no dice. The parents, understandably, I mean, they trusted the doctors.
Right.
Only a certified doctor can diagnose, only they can prescribe. It sets up this classic tension, doesn't it? Gut feeling versus the experts.
Absolutely. And this is where things get really pivotal. The child is just getting worse, feeling desperate, fearful.
No relief in sight.
Exactly. So they feel like they have to do something. The next time the parents step out, driven by this powerful gut feeling.
And just needing to feel better.
They search the house, meticulously find the leftover quinine from years ago and just
Yeah.
take it, self-medicates.
And what happens? A few hours later, the fever starts to break. The aches ease up. By the time the parents get back, the kid is clearly recovering.
It wasn't just getting better physically, though. The autobiography frames this as this huge, life-changing moment, a fundamental realization about illness, about intuition.
It really hammered home this lesson, didn't it? That illness isn't just about matching symptoms to a textbook page or a test result. It's deeply tied to your own lived experience, your memories, that inner knowing about your own body.
Yeah, the book really emphasizes this. It says this incident was the absolute origin point for this core belief. Patient stories, really listening, using intuition that's crucial for finding real solutions. It goes way beyond just the prescription pad.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often do we or does the system kind of dismiss that personal experience?
Mm.
What could change if intuition wasn't just seen as like a nice anecdote, but actually integrated?
That's a huge question. And this struggle, this personal battle, it wasn't just about getting over an illness. It was the seed, really, for this whole vision for healthcare for humanity that unfolds later.
You called it a foundational book of experience, and that feels right. It led directly to wanting to go into medicine.
But not just to fit in. The autobiography talks about feeling really uncomfortable with the professional norms, the expectations.
There's that anecdote about their father, right? Criticizing them for giving free consultations to the poor.
Yeah, saying, people will laugh at you, calling it stupid not to cash in. That must have been tough to hear.
It highlights that internal conflict, which then spurred the move to the UK.
With a very clear goal, though, not just a change of scenery.
No, the aim was pretty ambitious from the start, to develop some kind of simple tool, something accessible that could tackle health inequalities, offer free basic advice, you know.
The idea being to cut down on wasted consultations, reduce costs, and basically empower people with knowledge, democratize healthcare information.
Yeah, that drive to create a tool, even back then, shows this deep commitment to access, to equity. It seems directly forged from those early experiences with, well, seeing the system's limits and having these strong personal values about helping people, not just profiting.
It really shows how one powerful experience can shape everything that follows.
And that conviction, that willingness to challenge things, it got tested on a much bigger stage later on, moving from personal insight to a full-blown systemic critique.
Okay, so fast forward 2005, the NHS. There's this incident.
Right, a 19-year-old patient, an
Yeah.
athlete vegetarian, comes in with a swollen wrist,
And the doctor, apparently with just a quick look, says it's gout.
which, as the autobiography points out, is, well, pretty much impossible. Given the age, the diet, gout is highly unlikely.
And the prescribed medicine didn't work. Shocker.
Worse than not working. The patient's condition deteriorated rapidly, spread from the wrist up to the elbow, and the skin developed this weird snake-like scaling. Really disturbing.
It was only after this visionary, the author, got involved, did some deep research, that the real diagnosis came out.
MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, a serious, dangerous antibiotic-resistant bacterial infection.
It just starkly showed, didn't it, that the first doctor just wasn't familiar with something so critical. It's like an echo of the childhood malaria story, but with potentially much graver consequences.
Exactly. And MRSA, it's tricky stuff. It can live on your skin harmlessly,
Right.
but if it gets into your bloodstream through a wound, a catheter, anything like that, it becomes life-threatening. Serious complications.
And the R in MRSA is the key, right? Resistant. Resistant to common antibiotics like methicillin. That makes it super hard to treat, especially in hospitals where it tends to spread.
Yeah, the symptoms start small, maybe little red blisters, but they can escalate fast. Painful boils, infections in joints, bone marrow, lungs, even the heart. It's nasty.
So for the author, this wasn't just one bad case. It was like confirmation. A chilling reminder of misdiagnosis and a clear sign of the dangers lurking in standard medical practices. It really cemented the need for something different.
And their response wasn't quiet. It was direct, uncompromising.
They went straight at the NHS, didn't they? Accusations of unethical medical practices, medical negligence, strong words.
Very strong. And the concern wasn't just about one doctor making a mistake. It was systemic. The autobiography points fingers at nurses with no medical qualification, training under supervision and examination and registration by the General Medical Council.
Implying they were practicing beyond their scope.
That seems to be the implication, yes, leading to pain, suffering, and complication, described bluntly as quackery. It's a profound charge against the system itself.
And the pushback, the resistance they faced, the autobiography details it quite vividly.
Oh yeah, victimization, benefits being withheld, legal cases dragged out deliberately to bankrupt them, force them to drop it, constant attempts to tame and subdue them.
It sounds exhausting. The personal cost must have been immense. The source mentions the trauma of persecution.
But it also says, I was steadfast. That level of commitment, facing down the kind of institutional pressure, it really speaks volumes about the depth of their conviction. Ethics over personal well-being, essentially.
And the critique didn't end with just that incident or specific staff issues. It broadened out.
Right. There were strong objections to the NICE guidelines, too, described as misleading and masterminded protocols.
The argument being they forced doctors into a box, leading to errors because they couldn't treat the individual.
Precisely. Prioritizing standardization over the patient's unique situation, and concern about junior doctors, too, relying on pre-printed assessment paper instead of truly listening, engaging, diagnosing properly, missing the full story.
And then there's the whole issue of nurse prescribing. That drew specific fire.
Yeah, the autobiography cites inadequacy in pharmacological knowledge among nurse prescribers, and the fact they often rely on a limited list, a nurse prescriber's formulary, which, the argument goes, restricts their ability to reach comprehensive conclusions.
Now, the source does acknowledge the other side, the supposed benefits like reducing GP workload, fewer interruptions for doctors.
Sure, it mentions those. But it immediately counters with that powerful criticism from a BMA doctor back in 2005, calling nurse prescribing irresponsible and dangerous. Full stop.
Preferring the highest level of care provided by a fully trained doctor. It's a clear preference.
So what you end up seeing is this fundamental clash of philosophies in medicine, right? You've got the protocol-driven, efficiency-focused model on one hand.
And on the other, this intuition-driven, deeply personalized, patient-first approach championed in the autobiography.
And the implication is that this isn't just a theoretical debate. It has real, tangible consequences for patients when systems prioritize generalized rules over understanding the individual nuances. How many other areas of life does that apply to,
That's a really potent thought. It makes you wonder about that core element, intuition. How does something that feels so intangible, almost mystical sometimes, how does that actually drive concrete action? Especially in really complex fields like medicine or even AI.
Well, the autobiography makes it clear that religiously following intuition was the guiding principle. Right from that childhood illness through all the later battles with the healthcare system. It wasn't an occasional flash, it was the compass.
It kind of resonates with what psychologists talk about, doesn't it? Like Kahneman with his fast intuitive thinking versus slow analytical thought.
Exactly. Or thinkers like Yuri Alon, Adam Grant, Stephen Johnson. They all explore how intuition often provides that initial spark, the creative leap. It helps scientists, innovators solve problems. It's like intuition invites the analytical mind to dance, as one source put it.
So the author's journey seems like a prime example of that, using deep intuition as a guide through incredibly complex scientific and ethical waters.
And then the autobiography takes another leap, introducing this concept of a quantum conscious model of health.
Okay, that sounds potentially complex. What does that mean exactly? It's not about quantum physics experiments, is it?
Not in the lab coat sense, no. It's more of a framework, a visionary idea. It looks at the role of consciousness itself, our beliefs, even the placebo effect in the healing process.
So integrating the emotional, mental, and physical, but with maybe AI playing a supportive role.
That's the idea. Holistic integration, potentially amplified or supported by AI. Now, academically, philosophers explore how quantum phenomena, weird things like bicipital perception or temporal non-locality, might connect to mental processes. So the idea of quantum concepts relating to mind isn't totally out there.
But the autobiography's model is more focused on how our consciousness, our intention, our belief impacts our physical health.
Precisely. It's like if you understand the invisible mechanisms, call it intuition, consciousness, belief, you can unlock new ways to heal. Just like understanding quantum mechanics itself challenges our basic view of reality, this model challenges our view of health.
Interesting. So building on that intuitive foundation and this holistic view, the author makes a really significant shift.
Yeah, a pivotal decision. They decided to abandon earlier internet projects, something called gotosurgery.com, created way back in the 80s, apparently.
And this wasn't just like, oh, I have a new idea. The book says it came from this sudden, stark realization.
Of what will happen to millions of souls on Earth. That phrase really jumps out. It signals this profound sense of urgency, a global purpose that went way beyond any personal project.
And that urgency, that global vision, leads directly to Dr. Maya GPT.
Right. And the name itself, Maya, is brilliant. It has that dual meaning.
First, the acronym, Medical Advice You Assess, which speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It really does. It's about demystifying medicine, decoding how doctors derive a diagnosis, as the book puts it, letting you, the patient, think through the expectancies, get educated before you even see a doctor.
It transforms you from a passive recipient to an active participant, giving you agency through knowledge.
And then there's that second meaning of Maya, illusion, which points to the deeper philosophy.
The idea of cutting through the illusion of dependency, the way the traditional system can sometimes make patients feel powerless.
Exactly. Revealing that dependency as an illusion you can break free from. And what's really fascinating is how the design of Dr. Maya GPT embodies this. It's not just another symptom checker app.
No, it sounds quite different. It uses a clinically tested, color-coded triage system designed by a real physician. Can you unpack that a bit?
Imagine feeding your information into the system. And instead of just a list of scary possibilities, it guides you through this clear, color-coded pathway. Maybe green means safe to manage at home, yellow suggests seek consultation soon, red indicates emergency, act now. It's intuitive guidance towards the safest action.
And crucially, the book stresses it's not algorithm-based, but intuition-inspired from 40 years of medical practice. That's a huge claim.
It is. It suggests the AI isn't just crunching data in a purely mechanical way. It's been trained on and aims to replicate the nuanced, often subconscious decision-making patterns learned by a physician over decades. The gut feelings refined by experience.
So it's a layered approach. Mobile apps, web tools, AI assistants.
Yeah, and designed to work even in crisis situations like pandemics, offering real-time triage when the normal systems are collapsing. The goal is always twofold. Educate you, the user, deeply, but also guide you pragmatically to the safest, best next step.
It really throws up that question again, doesn't it? Intuition versus algorithms in AI, especially in medicine.
Absolutely. What feels revolutionary here is that deliberate effort to embed a human doctor's intuitive judgment, their ethical sense, into the AI. It's moving beyond just processing data, aiming for a kind of wisdom, a more human-centered intelligence within the technology itself.
And a big part of this mission, tied back to those early experiences, is this idea of a patient-centric revolution that's globally accessible.
Right. Thinking about bridging those huge gaps in healthcare, reaching rural villages, using voice tools for people who can't read, getting into remote areas without good medical facilities.
And also tackling the bureaucracy. The book mentions eliminating health insurance intermediaries, aiming for affordable, direct access.
Yeah, all part of that focus on reducing disparities, trying to create a situation where people might literally shed tears of happiness because they finally have access to knowledge and care, putting humanity before the hierarchy, as the book says.
Beyond access, there's also this strong focus on tackling major public health threats, like antimicrobial resistance, AMR.
Yes, Dr. Srivatsa, the author, has apparently been warning about AMR since way back in 1989, long before it became such a mainstream concern,
Wow.
and pointing the finger squarely at human recklessness, misuse, overuse of antibiotics driving this crisis.
So how does Dr. Maya GPT help with that specifically?
By guiding people towards appropriate self-care when possible. If the app can help you understand that your cough is likely viral and doesn't need antibiotics, or help you manage symptoms safely at home.
That reduces unnecessary doctor visits.
Exactly. And fewer unnecessary visits mean fewer opportunities for antibiotics to be prescribed inappropriately, which is critical for slowing down resistance.
It's a massive issue. That WHO list from 2017, the 12 urgent bacterial threats, it's scary stuff. And how bacteria share resistance genes mutate. MRSA is the poster child for this, right?
It really is. Highly dangerous, hard to treat. So empowering individuals with better information, helping them know when antibiotics aren't needed, is a huge contribution. It protects everyone in the long run.
And the pandemic preparedness angle, too. That's vital.
Absolutely. If an app can help accurately identify potentially infectious people early and guide them to isolate safely at home, think about the impact.
Protects healthcare workers from being overwhelmed and exposed.
And it protects the general public from cross-infection, especially when hospitals are hot spots. The book talks about the fear, the isolation, the stress healthcare workers face during COVID.
You hear those stories, yeah.
So Dr. Maya GPT is positioned as a tool to mitigate that, to protect life by reducing fear, ignorance, dependency, especially when everything else feels like it's breaking down.
And underpinning all of this, flowing from those early critiques of the system, is this direct challenge to the profit-driven healthcare model.
Yes, challenging the systemic abuses that can arise from that model, advocating strongly for a system that genuinely puts humanity before the hierarchy, serving the poor, the illiterate, the voiceless.
It comes back to that idea of reclaiming free will in health. Using the tool to understand, to choose, not just passively accept what the system dictates, especially if that system seems more focused on profit than well-being.
And if you look at the bigger picture, this vision has led to comparisons between the author and Charaka.
The ancient pioneer of Ayurveda, wow, that's quite a comparison.
It is. Ayurveda, is one of the world's oldest holistic healing systems. Huge emphasis on prevention, balance, the mind-body connection.
So the comparison suggests Dr. Maya GPT isn't just tech, it's connecting modern AI with that kind of timeless, ancient wisdom, aiming for a really holistic view of health.
That seems to be the idea, a synthesis.
Yeah.
And it reinforces that concept of digitalizing patient-centered care, using technology not just for efficiency, but to help people reclaim that fundamental free will, make informed, conscious choices about their own health and well-being.
This blend of ancient wisdom and modern tech then leads into maybe the most profound and perhaps challenging part of the autobiography, this concept of universal law.
Right. And the core belief is stated very clearly. Every human who has violated or ignored the law of the universe will have to accept what the universe dictates.
That's a strong statement. It suggests a kind of cosmic justice, doesn't it? Where actions, or even ignoring something you shouldn't, brings inevitable consequences. Not necessarily from society, but from the universe itself.
Exactly. It transcends human laws, human ideas of punishment. It's presented as an inherent mechanism of the cosmos. And it's illustrated powerfully with an analogy from the Mahabharata.
The story of Bhishma.
Yes. And the book is careful to frame his suffering not as a punishment in the usual sense, but as a direct consequence of his choices and the fulfillment of prophecy.
Remind us of the key points there. Bhishma was this great warrior, very righteous in many ways.
Extremely respected, but he took this incredibly binding vow celibacy and absolute loyalty to his stepmother's family line.
Which tragically put him on the wrong side in the Great War. Right, fighting for the Kauravas, even though he knew they were unjust.
He knew they were wrong. And his specific consequence, according to the autobiography and the epic, stemmed from two key failures born from that loyalty. First, failing to defend the nation, failing to stop the Kauravas' path to war and ruin.
And second, perhaps even more damning,
Failing to protect Draupadi. When the Kauravas were publicly, brutally humiliating her, trying to disrobe her, Bhishma, despite his power and moral stature, remained silent, bound by his vow.
that inaction, that failure to uphold Dharma, righteousness when it mattered most, that led to his end.
It led directly to his painful death, lying on a bed of arrows, unable to die until he chose to. A direct consequence of his choices, his misplaced loyalty, his inaction, not just some random act of God.
It's a powerful illustration. Even for the righteous, inaction or misguided loyalty can bring about terrible, self-inflicted outcomes.
Like the autobiography brings that lesson crashing into the present day, specifically targeting the NHS situation.
Right, the author says, knowing the lesson of Bhishma, I could not stay quiet when nurses and doctors employed in the NHS were doing wrong, making that direct link.
Connecting the failure to act against perceived wrongdoing in the NHS to Bhishma's failure. And the expectation wasn't for personal gain.
No reward, no recognition, the book says.
Just that leaders to speak to me and rectify the error. A basic expectation of accountability, of moral leadership, which, the author contends, simply didn't happen.
And this is where the claims escalate dramatically, linking that specific situation to huge global consequences.
Yeah, it's quite severe. The text states, the consequence of their action has made UK economy, political and religious tension that is culminating to civil war. A direct causal link is drawn.
Wow, and it doesn't stop with the UK.
No, it broadens out massively, predicting that nations, leaders of nations, will soon start experiencing turmoil in their counter. It's a global prediction.
And explicitly includes India, saying leaders there are focusing on political correction instead of listening to the millions of people suffer in silence. So no country in the world will be spared.
It really posits this almost cosmic principle, doesn't it? That leaders failing to listen, failing to alleviate suffering, directly causes societal breakdown. Ignoring suffering breeds chaos, almost like a universal law kicking in.
A reckoning for prioritizing power or politics over people's actual well-being.
And to describe this struggle, the book uses these powerful terms from Hinduism.
The Rakshasas and the Devagana.
Exactly. The greedy, power-hungry people are now ruling nations. They are the Rakshasa explains in Hinduism, using that ancient term for demonic, selfish, chaos-loving beings to describe certain modern leaders.
Contrast.
The universe has now woken up defenders of Dharma, known as Devagana, to protect Naras or Manushas, the true inhabitants on earth. So the Devas, the celestial beings of righteousness, are rising up to defend ordinary humans, the true inhabitants, from these Rakshasa-like rulers. It's framed as this epic, ongoing cosmic battle playing out in our world.
It's important to remember, though, as you mentioned, that while the autobiography uses these terms allegorically for today.
Right. Terms like Dharma and concepts around social structure in Hinduism have really deep, complex histories and interpretations. Thinkers like Dr. Ambedkar spent lifetimes analyzing the origins and impacts of caste, varna, critiquing historical power structures within Hinduism.
So there's a whole spectrum of thought within Hinduism itself about justice, society, and Dharma that provides a rich background to these more contemporary allegorical uses in the autobiography.
Definitely. Which leads into how the book defines Hinduism itself.
Which is quite striking. Hinduism is not a religion, but simply a way of living. That really shifts the perspective.
It moves it away from dogma, temples, rituals necessarily, and towards an internal ethical guide.
And the only rule is given as, trust your soul, do what your soul dictates, provided your action does not harm plants, animals including humans, does not inflict pain and suffering to physical or mental well-being.
It's beautifully simple, yet profound. It emphasizes ahimsa, non-harming, as the core principle, guided by your own inner truth, your soul.
And it explicitly rejects rigid moral binaries. There is nothing wrong or right, bad or good, and you don't need to go to temple or pray.
The focus shifts to compassionate action, but with a caveat. Always help the soul who seek your help, not offer help they did not seek.
Why that distinction?
Because the universe will grant their wish if they deserve it. It suggests a trust in the cosmic process, respecting individual paths and timing. Don't interfere unless asked, because the universe has its own flow.
And this idea of following your soul, reclaiming free will, connects directly back to Dr. Maya GPT.
Yes. The tool is meant to help people use the free will they reclaim to love one another. Because the ultimate divine purpose, according to this view, isn't about hoarding power or wealth.
Because God does not want humans to surrender their free will to hoard wealth, power, fame, and health. It's about reclaiming that inner agency to connect, to love.
It really frames the AI not just as a medical tool, but almost as a spiritual technology,
Hmm.
aiding in this process of inner liberation and connection, guided by that internal moral compass.
Which brings us to the final section, dealing with the starkest warnings about AI itself and the future predicted in the book.
Right. There's a very direct, strong message aimed squarely at leaders who continue to hoard wealth, inflict pain and suffering to fellow human, and living under an illusion that AI will help them become powerful and wealthy.
It's challenging that techno-optimist view among some powerful people, the idea that AI is just a tool to amplify their existing power and control, consequence-free.
Exactly. And it highlights that paradox we touched on earlier. AI, like Dr. Maya GPT, shows the potential for incredible good, for liberation, for healing.
But in the wrong hands, driven by greed or disregard for that universal law.
It just becomes another tool to reinforce inequality, control, suffering. It echoes those broader ethical worries about advanced AI, inequality, breaking security, job losses. Power without morality is dangerous, whatever the tech.
And this is where the prediction gets really specific and quite chilling.
Yeah. The autobiography states, if they don't change their ways, the same AI that helped me create Dr. Maya GPT will start making the life of these leaders a living hell.
Wow, so the AI itself turns on its creators, or at least those who misuse its potential.
It's presented that way, not as a sci-fi robot uprising, but as part of that cosmic feedback loop. The misused tool becomes the instrument of consequence, mandated by universal law. Technology itself becomes a vector for karmic return for those who abuse power.
And the collateral damage of this.
That's the truly tragic part. Unfortunately, billions will suffer, and there is nothing any human or God can do to alleviate pain and suffering.
So the consequences of leaders' actions, amplified potentially by misused AI, will cause suffering on such a scale that it's beyond intervention.
That's the bleak picture painted. A kind of inescapable self-inflicted global suffering stemming from violating fundamental cosmic principles. It's deeply fatalistic in a way.
And then to top it all off, there's that specific date.
The 2060 prediction. As Isaac Newton predicted, the world will come to an end in 2060.
Now, historically, connecting Newton directly to that specific date as a world-ending prophecy is debatable, let's say. His work definitely explored divine order and a deterministic universe.
Right, his cosmology was profoundly influential. But the autobiography presents this 2060 date as a specific prediction attributed to him, tying it into this larger narrative of inevitable consequences based on current human actions and the violation of universal law.
So it's framed not just as a possibility, but as the unavoidable endpoint of the current trajectory, a future we're locked into because of these ongoing violations.
That's the stark implication. Not something we might avoid, but something we are actively creating, and which the universe, through its laws, will ensure comes to pass.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around this. We've covered an incredible journey here, outlined in this autobiography, from a child's illness sparking profound intuitive insight.
All the way to creating Dr. Maya GPT, a tool explicitly designed for good, to reduce disparities, empower people, make them shed tears of happiness by giving them back control over their health and knowledge, reclaiming free will.
We've dug into that core message about universal law, the inescapable consequences of ignoring it, whether it's personal actions, systemic failures like those perceived in the NHS, or the actions of global leaders.
That Bhishma analogy keeps coming back, doesn't it? Action, inaction, loyalty, it all has weight, it all has consequences according to this worldview.
And Dr. Maya GPT stands out as this potential force for positive change, a way to reclaim agency, foster connection, maybe even protect humanity by addressing health crises, challenging flawed systems.
But alongside that hope comes the stark warning, aimed at leaders clinging to power and wealth, thinking AI is their ultimate tool. The warning that the very technology created for benefit could become an instrument of consequence if those universal laws are continually ignored.
Which leaves us with a really provocative final thought, doesn't it? Given these predictions, turmoil, suffering, even a specific end date, all tied to leadership and universal law.
What's the role of the individual in all this? What power does our own intuition, our own effort to reclaim free will, actually have in navigating a future that sounds, in this account, almost predetermined by larger forces and failures.
How does diving into this specific, personal, yet cosmically scaled autobiography challenge your ideas about justice, about consequence, about what our purpose even is, especially as AI becomes more and more intertwined with our existence?
It definitely leaves you with a lot to chew on, a very different lens to view our current world and our own choices within it.